There are cases that become famous because they are unsolved, and there are cases that become famous because they are misunderstood. The story of Elisa Lam belongs firmly in the second category. Over time, this case stopped being remembered for what actually happened, and instead became remembered for how it looked, how it felt, and how it was interpreted online. Edited footage replaced verified context. Speculation grew louder than evidence, and a real person slowly disappeared behind a story that no longer resembled her life. This video is not an attempt to revive a mystery, and it is not an argument against official findings. It is an examination of what is known, what has been misunderstood, and how easily facts can lose control of a narrative once a tragedy becomes public property. To understand what happened, we first have to understand who this story is actually about. Before Elisa Lam became a headline, before she became the subject of theories, videos, and debates, she was a young woman traveling alone, doing something many people her age do. She was 21 years old. She was a student, and she had planned a solo trip down the west coast of the United States, documenting parts of it online for friends and family back home. By all available accounts, this was not an impulsive journey. It was planned. It was communicated. And it was something she was excited about. Like many people her age, Elisa wrote openly. She shared thoughts, struggles, and observations publicly. That openness would later be reinterpreted, dissected. But at the time, it was simply part of how she expressed herself. Elisa also lived with a mental health condition. This fact is important, but it has often been handled carelessly. It should not be treated as a plot device, nor as a shorthand explanation for tragedy. It is part of her medical history, one that was known, documented, and managed, and one that deserves to be discussed with care rather than spectacle. What matters here is not reducing Elisa Lam to a diagnosis or defining her by the way her life ended, but the understanding that she was a real person navigating adulthood, independence, and vulnerability in a very ordinary way, until her story was no longer allowed to remain ordinary. Because once she went missing, and once fragments of her final days began circulating without context, the internet did what it often does best. It filled uncertainty with interpretation. And that is where the case most people think they know begins to diverge from the one that can actually be examined.
Stay with us as we uncover every twist in this chilling case. And if you want more thrilling and investigative true crime stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for the next dark truth we expose.
To examine what actually happened, we have to begin with what can be verified. Not interpretations, not fragments, but a clear sequence of documented events. Elisa Lam arrived in Los Angeles in late January of 2013 as part of a planned solo trip along the west coast of the United States. She checked into the Cecil Hotel, located in downtown Los Angeles, a neighborhood known for its dense population and transient foot traffic. At the time of her arrival, there was nothing to suggest distress, conflict, or disruption beyond what would be expected of a traveler in a large city. During her stay, Elisa was initially assigned to a shared room. According to hotel staff, concerns were raised by other occupants regarding her behavior, leading to her being moved to a private room. These reports were documented, but they did not include allegations of violence, threats, or criminal behavior. The last confirmed sighting of Elisa Lam occurred on January 31st, 2013. That day, she was seen in the lobby of the hotel. There is no verified record of a confrontation, pursuit, or altercation involving her at that time. After this point, communication with her family ceased. When Elisa failed to check out as scheduled, concern grew. On February 1st, 2013, her family contacted authorities, and a missing persons report was filed. Law enforcement began a search that included the hotel, surrounding streets, and later, a wider area of downtown Los Angeles. Police searched common areas of the hotel, reviewed available surveillance footage, and spoke with staff. At this stage, there was no indication of a crime. The search was conducted under the assumption that Elisa was a missing person, not a victim of foul play. At this point in the timeline, the facts stop. Temporarily. What follows is not speculation, but what occurred next, as the search continued and circumstances changed. The moment that would come to define public memory of this case did not begin with a discovery, but with the release of a video. During the search for Elisa Lam, investigators reviewed surveillance footage from inside the hotel. One clip, recorded inside an elevator, was later released publicly in the hope that someone might recognize her or provide information. What most people encountered online was not the footage in its original form. The clip was edited, slowed down, and shortened before it spread across the internet. They found no evidence of another person inside the elevator. No confrontation, no pursuit, no sign of coercion. The footage shows Elisa Lam alone in an elevator. It does not show what she was thinking. Neither does it show what happened afterward. Without context, viewers filled in the gaps themselves. This was how evidence became interpretation. And once interpretation takes hold, it becomes difficult for facts to regain control. What followed next would deepen confusion rather than resolve it. As the search continued, the tension eventually turned upward, to the roof of the hotel. The decision to search the roof did not come from the elevator footage. It came weeks later, after guests reported issues with the hotel's water supply. A maintenance worker was sent to inspect the rooftop water tanks. And then, one of the tanks was discovered opened. Inside, the body of Elisa Lam was found. Many questions immediately followed, particularly about how she could have reached the roof. Contrary to popular belief, access to the roof was not impossible. Fire escapes and stairwells provided potential routes. Another widely repeated claim involved the tank's lid. Early reports suggested the lid was closed. Later clarification confirmed the lid was found open. An autopsy was conducted following the recovery of her body. The official cause of death was ruled accidental drowning. There were no signs of physical trauma or sexual assault. Toxicology results were consistent with her prescribed medications. Based on these findings, investigators concluded there was no evidence of foul play. This conclusion did not end public debate, but it did close the official investigation. What followed was not new evidence, but a new story. Once official findings were released, the investigation ended. But public interest did not. When answers feel unsatisfying, people look elsewhere for meaning. In this case, that meaning was often drawn from fragments taken out of context. Repeated exposure to the same imagery reinforced those interpretations. The more often the footage was replayed, the more familiar and convincing it felt. Online platforms tend to reward content that provokes reaction rather than resolution. That dynamic favored speculation over explanation. Over time, the narrative surrounding the case grew larger than the person at its center. Elisa Lam became a symbol rather than a subject. This pattern is not unique to this case. It reflects how modern audiences often encounter tragedy through fragments, loops, and interpretation rather than full context. Understanding this process does not require rejecting curiosity, only recognizing its limits. Because once myth takes hold, clarity has to work much harder to be heard. Even in thoroughly investigated cases, not every question receives a definitive answer. That reality does not indicate negligence or deception. It reflects the limits of evidence in real-world investigations. In the Elisa Lam case, certain moments remain undocumented. There is no complete record of her movements after her last confirmed sighting on January 31st, 2013. Those gaps are not evidence of interference, only absence of data. Not every action is observed. Not every decision leaves a record. That uncertainty is uncomfortable, but it is not unusual. The temptation to explain every gap often leads to conclusions the evidence does not support. In this case, speculation filled those gaps more loudly than facts could. What remains unknown does not alter what is known. And what is known has been documented, reviewed, and concluded. Recognizing uncertainty is not a weakness of investigation. It is a sign of its integrity. When the speculation fades and the theories fall away, what remains is not mystery, but loss. Elisa Lam was not a symbol. She was a person. She was a young woman navigating adulthood, independence, and uncertainty, as many people do. Her openness, curiosity, and inner life were later reframed as something else. In the years since, her story has been retold thousands of times. Often without care, often without context. The real tragedy is not that questions remain, but that certainty was claimed where none existed. Elisa Lam deserved more than speculation. She deserved to be remembered as she was, not as a mystery, and not as a myth. Understanding her story means letting go of what we want it to be, and accepting what it was. Stories like this do not end neatly, but they do end. The official investigation into Elisa Lam's death concluded years ago. The evidence was reviewed, findings were documented, and conclusions were reached. Those conclusions may not satisfy every curiosity, but they represent what can be responsibly stated and what cannot. At Truth in Shadows, our focus is not on amplifying mystery. It is on examining evidence, context, and consequence. Not to sensationalize tragedy, but to understand it. If there is value in revisiting cases like this, it lies in learning how narratives form and how easily they can eclipse reality. Understanding that process matters, not just for this case, but for every story that follows. Because truth does not need embellishment, only patience.
You're watching Truth in Shadows, the State Crime Archives, where we uncover the darkest crimes, the betrayals of trust, and the stories hidden in the margins of public record. Here, every crime leaves a shadow, and every shadow tells the truth. If you're drawn to true crime told with depth, honesty, and cinematic detail, subscribe now. Like this video, share it, and join us as we explore cases where justice and deception collide.